The ocean can turn from a serene paradise to a deadly trap in seconds, and the cost of recklessness is often instant. From a playful push overboard in Gansby that spiraled into a fatal shark attack, to a thrill-seeker paddling the Brisbane River who provoked a bull shark's fury. These stories reveal how entitlement, ignored warnings, and a single reckless choice can trigger unimaginable chaos in predator territory. On February 19, 2023, a luxury yacht drifted off the coast of Gansby, South Africa, surrounded by restless gray water that rolled under a heavy sky. It was late afternoon, and the tourists on board were still laughing from lunch, holding cameras, drinks, and half-eaten fruit plates, their excitement rising as the sea shifted beneath them. Among them were Amanda and Jacob Myers, a married couple from Bristol who had come to South Africa on a 2-week holiday. Eager to see the ocean's power up close, to feel that rush of danger and wonder that people always talked about when they mentioned this place. They had spent the morning watching seals on Dyer Island and taking photos of the cliffs. By the time the yacht slowed to idle, Amanda's playful energy had turned into carelessness. That impulsive boldness that sometimes comes when the sea feels too far away to fear. She stood near the stern railing, laughing with her husband as the yacht rocked on the uneven swells, her hand brushing his shoulder as she joked about pushing him in. Jacob grinned at her and turned to look at the choppy water. But before he could move away, she gave a quick shove. It was meant to be funny, a harmless prank, something to make everyone laugh. He splashed into the water with a loud cry, his arms flailing for a moment before he surfaced, sputtering. The laughter that followed from the nearby deckhands and passengers was uneasy, a mix of amusement and shock, because everyone knew how unpredictable these waters could be. Gansby was famous for great whites, for the sleek, powerful shapes that sometimes appeared without warning. And even a few seconds in the open could mean danger. Amanda leaned over the railing to look for her husband, still laughing, still not realizing how reckless it had been. But the yacht shifted with the current, and her foot slipped on the wet metal rail. There was no time to catch herself. She pitched forward and fell headfirst into the cold Atlantic, a sharp gasp lost beneath the slap of waves. The water was freezing, the shock immediate and brutal, stealing her breath as she fought to find the surface. Jacob saw her fall and tried to swim toward her, but the current dragged them apart, and the yacht loomed above like a wall of white steel. Voices echoed from the deck as the crew scrambled to react. People shouted for ropes, for poles, for someone to throw the life ring, but the scene was chaos, every second slipping away faster than they could think. Beneath the surface, something enormous moved, drawn by the sudden disturbance, by the vibrations of two struggling bodies in the water. A 5-meter great white shark surged upward from the depths. It had been circling near the reef, tracking the sound of fish and the faint hum of engines, and now, sensing opportunity, it accelerated toward the noise. Its pale belly flashed once under the light before the jaws opened wide. The strike was so sudden that the water exploded upward, a violent surge of white spray and crimson bloom as the shark clamped onto Amanda's leg. Witnesses screamed from the deck as her body was pulled under, the water thrashing with terrifying force. Jacob shouted her name as he swam desperately, but the creature's power was beyond anything human. The shark twisted, shaking her from side to side, tearing through muscle and bone with unstoppable strength. Crew members threw ropes, poles, anything they could reach, but she was already gone beneath the surface, swallowed by the dark turbulence. The shark released her briefly, circling back as the waves turned red. For a few seconds her body surfaced, limp and unrecognizable, her wetsuit shredded before she was pulled down again. Jacob tried to reach her, but one of the deckhands dove in and dragged him back toward the ladder, forcing him onto the platform as he resisted in shock and disbelief. The shark's dorsal fin broke the surface only once before disappearing into the deep, the sea settling into a deceptive calm that made the horror of the moment feel unreal. The silence that followed was heavy and stunned, broken only by the sound of the waves slapping the hull. When the crew finally managed to retrieve what remained, the scene was unbearable. Only pieces of torn fabric floated near the stern, drifting away on the tide. Jacob sat wrapped in a towel, shaking, his eyes fixed on the empty sea. The tourists stood frozen, unable to look at each other, their laughter from minutes before now replaced by a deep, sickened quiet. The captain called for help, his voice steady but hollow as he reported what had happened, though everyone already knew there was nothing more to be done. Within 20 minutes, a rescue boat arrived, scanning the water with spotlights. but the body was never recovered. The currents off Gansby were merciless, and the predators below left no trace. News of the incident spread quickly through the local community, another grim reminder of how easily the line between thrill and tragedy could vanish. Marine experts later confirmed that great whites were especially active that season, feeding close to the coast as seals migrated, their movements unpredictable and often triggered by surface noise. What made the attack stand out was how quickly it happened, the short distance from the yacht, the near-instant response to human movement in the water, the sheer violence of the first strike. One researcher described it as a textbook case of predatory instinct overriding hesitation, the shark reacting not out of malice but out of the raw, unfiltered logic of survival. In the weeks that followed, investigators interviewed witnesses and reviewed the yacht's onboard logs. But there was little to add beyond the testimonies. The accounts were consistent. The playful push, the accidental fall, the sudden eruption of water, and the seconds that changed everything. Some tourists struggled with guilt, unable to erase the images from their minds. The flash of white, the red trail, the desperate cries. The sea that had seemed so inviting only hours before now felt infinite and cruel. Local guides began reminding guests, even more firmly than before, that the ocean was not a playground. It demanded respect, awareness, and humility. For Jacob, the return to shore was a blur. The laughter from that afternoon replayed endlessly in his head, merging with the chaos that followed. In every movement of the waves, he saw her fall again, the split second between harmless fun and irreversible loss. Experts later called it a tragic irony, a moment of thoughtless playfulness that brought on the very danger people came to Gansby hoping to glimpse safely from afar. In a place where predators ruled the deep, even one reckless gesture could bridge the distance between thrill and disaster. The ocean gave no second chances, and by the time the calm returned, it was already too late. On January 12, 2023, the sea off Hermanus, South Africa, shimmered under a sharp summer sun as a small tour boat glided across the rolling swells. The morning air was thick with salt and the hum of excitement as passengers leaned along the rails, cameras ready, hoping for the graceful arcs of southern right whales in the distance. The ocean was calm but alive, its surface broken now and then by flashes of dark fins and the occasional burst of mist as the giants surfaced to breathe. Among the tourists stood a woman named Carol Bennett, 54, an American on vacation who had joined the whale-watching tour that day after reading about it online. From the start, she had carried herself with a loud, impatient energy, one that made the quiet, attentive mood on deck feel uneasy. The operator, a seasoned local named Willem, guided the vessel steadily, keeping a respectful distance from the animals. He reminded passengers that approaching too closely could disturb the whales, especially the calves. Most nodded in understanding, happy to watch from afar. But Carol's irritation grew visible as minutes passed without what she deemed a close enough view. She began muttering complaints, her voice carrying easily over the wind. She mocked the caution, calling it unnecessary, and demanded that the captain move the boat nearer so she could take better pictures. Several passengers exchanged glances, their expressions uncomfortable yet silent. The crew, patient and polite, repeated the safety guidelines, explaining that disturbing the whales could provoke aggression. Her frustration only deepened, and the tension on board rose with each new protest. By late morning, a small pod of orcas appeared in the distance, their sleek black and white bodies cutting through the surf in smooth, synchronized movements. The sight drew gasps of awe from the group. Everyone lifted cameras, whispering in wonder. The orcas were feeding, chasing smaller fish that darted near the surface, their coordination both beautiful and intimidating. Willem slowed the engine and let the boat drift quietly, maintaining the legal distance. But Carol was unsatisfied. She shouted over the wind, demanding they move closer again, louder now, her tone sharp and mocking. The captain refused, explaining calmly that orcas could be unpredictable. But she laughed, calling the caution ridiculous. She moved toward the side rail, gripping it tightly, her knuckles white as she leaned far over the edge with her phone poised. Ignoring repeated warnings, she decided she would make her own opportunity. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small snack bar, tearing it open with the idea that tossing it into the water might lure a whale closer for a perfect photograph. Passengers nearby tried to dissuade her, but she was determined. As the boat rocked on a rising swell, she stretched further over the rail, extending her arm above the churning water. The metal beneath her feet was slick with spray, and her shoes lost grip for just a fraction of a second. That was all it took. With a startled gasp, Carol pitched forward and plunged into the sea, the sound swallowed immediately by the crash of waves against the hull. The shock of the cold water hit her lungs like fire, stealing her breath as she struggled to orient herself. The crew reacted instantly, shouting to stop the engines and throwing ropes and life rings into the water. Passengers crowded the edge, eyes wide with horror. Below the surface, movement stirred, fast, fluid, and powerful. The orcas, drawn by the splash and vibrations, turned toward the disturbance with curious precision. The first approached from beneath her, its massive shape barely visible until it rose, striking her midsection with a blunt, explosive force that lifted her clear of the water. Her body flipped helplessly through the air before slamming back down, the sound of impact echoing over the sea. The water around her erupted again as a second orca swept its tail across the surface, the blow knocking her under and sending up a spray of foam and blood from a gash across her leg. Witnesses screamed as she vanished beneath the waves, bubbles marking where she had gone under. The orcas circled tightly, not attacking to kill but reacting to movement, driven by instinct and confusion. Crew members rushed to lower ropes, reaching desperately toward the spot where she had gone under. The water boiled with motion, black fins slicing past, flashes of white patches appearing and disappearing. For long seconds, there was no sign of her. And then suddenly she broke the surface, coughing, gasping, flailing as a current dragged her sideways. Her eyes were wide with terror, her limbs moving without control. Two crewmen leaned dangerously far over the railing to grab her arm as another steadied the rope. With one powerful heave, they pulled her halfway onto the platform, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin pale and bruised. The next wave nearly dragged her back in, but the men held on, their muscles straining until they finally managed to pull her fully aboard. The deck was in chaos. People were crying, some were frozen in shock, others were helping as the crew wrapped her in towels and checked her injuries. The engines stayed off, the boat drifting in silence while the orcas moved away, resuming their distant hunt as if nothing had happened. Carol lay trembling, her breathing ragged, her body shaking uncontrollably from cold and pain. Her leg bled heavily from the tail strike, but she was alive, conscious, and able to speak weakly between shivers. The relief on board was immense, though no one spoke above a whisper. The sea, which had seemed wondrous moments before, now felt heavy with menace, its beauty intertwined with danger. When the boat reached shore, medical staff met them immediately. Carol was carried off, treated for deep bruises and a laceration on her thigh, her body sore from the impact but miraculously intact. Witnesses gave their statements, their voices still trembling as they described what they had seen. News of the incident spread quickly, sparking debate about tourist behavior and safety at sea. Marine experts later analyzed the footage and confirmed that the orca's actions were likely not an intentional attack, but rather defensive or investigative behavior triggered by sudden splashing. Still, the event stood as a grim lesson in human recklessness. It was a moment where a woman's defiance of simple caution nearly ended in tragedy. The ocean had no patience for pride, and even the calmest surface could conceal the strength of creatures that ruled below. On May 27, 2025, the humid air along the Brisbane River hung heavy with the scent of mangroves and fuel. The tide was rising fast, pushing brown water inland beneath a sky split by sunlight. Paddleboarders glided near the docks, their silhouettes shifting against the current. Among them was 28-year-old Lauren Harris, a fitness influencer from Orlando, Florida, who thrived on danger and spectacle. That afternoon, she wanted footage that would stand out, something daring, risky, and impressive. Ignoring posted warnings about strong tides and shark habitats, she pushed off from the dock, her friends cheering from shore. Staff had reminded the group to stay within the safety zone, but Lauren was already paddling farther, her confidence unshaken. The river shimmered deceptively calm, its surface hiding the silt and roots below where bull sharks often fed. The warm water carried her smoothly at first, her strokes steady, her phone mounted to record every movement. She turned toward a narrow channel near the mangroves, ignoring shouts from the dock for her to turn back. The thrill of defiance made her feel alive. The current deepened as she drifted closer to the edge of the channel. Beneath the water, dark shapes of branches and logs twisted in the slow pull of the tide. Lauren's pulse quickened when she spotted a long, pale object under the surface, a half-submerged log stretching across her path. Instead of steering around it, she decided to jump it, aiming to prove her skill. Her friends had their phones out, expecting another one of her confident tricks. She gathered speed, crouched low, and tried to launch forward. Her board struck the log head-on. The impact threw her balance instantly. In one violent motion, she was pitched into the murky river, her paddle flying from her hands. The cold water shocked her lungs, and the silt rose in thick clouds, blinding her. She surfaced, gasping, kicking instinctively, her movement sending loud splashes echoing across the channel. The water stilled for one breath, then erupted. From below, a 3.3-meter bull shark surged upward, drawn by the vibrations. Its jaws clamped around her right calf with the crushing force of a vice, driving her downward in a single violent pull. The bite split through muscle and bone, and her scream broke across the surface. She kicked and flailed, but the predator thrashed side to side, shaking her like prey. Water foamed red as the shark twisted, then released her, circling with ruthless precision. On shore, her friends screamed and ran toward the edge, shouting for ropes and help. Staff from the rental hut sprinted over, grabbing poles and life rings, hurling them toward the water. Lauren's head broke the surface for a moment, her face pale with terror, her legs shredded and bleeding heavily. She tried to swim, but the current pulled her sideways while the shark's shadow circled below, testing her weakness. The scene was chaos. Screams, splashing, shouts merging with the sound of the rising tide. The shark came again, brushing past her legs, its fin slicing through the surface like a blade. She thrashed desperately, each kick weakening her further. Two crew members waded waist-deep into the current, ropes in hand, reaching for her as she drifted closer to the shallows. The water surged again, the fin disappearing beneath her. For several endless seconds, she vanished, and panic spread across the dock. Then her body reappeared, spinning with the current, blood trailing behind. One of the men managed to grab her wrist, looping the rope beneath her arm as others pulled. Together, they dragged her toward the embankment, the tide pushing against them. Her skin was white, her body trembling violently as they hauled her onto the dock. Her leg was torn open, muscle and skin hanging in strips, the blood spreading in dark pools across the wood. Crew members pressed towels against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding as others scanned the water, but the predator was gone, melting back into the depths. The crowd fell silent, the earlier cheers replaced by stunned disbelief. Paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing her onto a stretcher as her friends watched, crying, their phones forgotten. The footage they had captured, meant to show her skill, had instead recorded her fall, the splash, the attack, and the frantic rescue. The river returned to its deceptive calm, the surface betraying no sign of the chaos that had just unfolded. By nightfall, the story had spread across local news. Another reckless incident in a river long known for its predators. Marine experts reviewed the event, explaining that bull sharks were common there, drawn upstream by high tides and runoff, especially during late May when visibility was poor. The attack had been instinctive, not deliberate, triggered by noise, movement, and confusion in murky water, but the conclusion was the same. Her actions had created the perfect opportunity for disaster. Lauren survived, though her injuries were severe, her recovery uncertain. The bite left deep scars, both physical and psychological, a permanent mark from a single reckless decision. Experts later described the event as preventable in every possible way, a collision between arrogance and nature's cold logic. Those who witnessed it never forgot the sound, the splash, the sudden silence, the moment when the river turned violent. They called it instant karma, a brutal lesson that the ocean and its rivers owed no one mercy. In predator territory, even the smallest act of defiance could provoke nature's swift reminder that power on water was always borrowed, never earned. As the sun set that evening, the tide carried away the last traces of blood, leaving the river smooth again, as though nothing had ever happened, except for those who had seen how quickly control could vanish when ego met instinct. On April 15, 2024, the turquoise waters of Ningaloo Reef, Western Australia, sparkled under a scorching morning sun, the coral below shimmering in hues of orange, purple, and green. The snorkel boat drifted gently in a protected cove, carrying a small group of tourists eager to glimpse the reef's abundant life. Among them was 31-year-old Vanessa Mitchell, a visitor from Sydney whose reputation among her friends leaned heavily on daring and spectacle. She had spent the past few years cultivating a persona online that thrived on risk, and this excursion was meant to produce the perfect image. one that would show her feeding the reef's apex predators directly, a feat no one else had attempted. From the start, she was insistent and loud. Guides reminded the group of safety rules, emphasizing that interactions with sharks were tightly controlled for a reason. They repeatedly instructed others not to wade into the water with bait, explaining that tiger sharks could become aggressive if they felt provoked or threatened. Most of the tourists nodded, attentive and respectful. But Vanessa argued, loudly insisting she knew better than the staff, that her experience and confidence made the precautions unnecessary. She carried a small bucket of bait, stepping toward the water even as the guides extended their arms in warning. Her overconfidence radiated across the deck, drawing shocked stares from her fellow snorkelers. Ignoring the repeated instructions, she waded into the warm, shallow waters, her legs cutting through the surface, her hands gripping the bait. The guide shouted warnings again, but she waved them off, raising her arms to display the bucket to the cameras mounted on her helmet. The water was calm, deceptively so. But beneath the surface, shadows shifted. The reef teemed with life, and tiger sharks, massive and powerful, were patrolling the deeper channels. Their sleek bodies glided silently, senses attuned to even the faintest movement or scent in the water. For a few moments, Vanessa felt invincible. The bait, tossed lightly into the water, floated just ahead of her, attracting small fish that darted among the coral. She laughed as she extended her hand further, attempting to bring the bucket closer to a gathering of shadows that her inexperienced eyes could barely distinguish. But the scent she released spread quickly through the water, carrying a signal that drew attention far faster than she anticipated. From the depths, a tiger shark, 4.2 meters in length, surged upward with terrifying speed. Its movements were precise, its mouth opening wide as it closed on her right calf with crushing force. The water erupted around her, foam and spray mingling with the rising blood as she screamed and flailed instinctively. She tried to kick away, her movements frantic, but the thrashing only intensified the predator's frenzy. The shark twisted, dragging her under, the power of its body sending waves crashing across the shallow reef. Coral scraped her back and arms, adding to the chaos. But the sheer strength of the animal controlled every movement. Fellow snorkelers screamed, panic rising as they realized the attack was happening in plain view. Guides immediately extended long poles, ropes, and floating lifelines toward her, reaching as far as they could without entering the dangerous zone themselves. The water churned violently, white foam and red streaks mixing with the natural hues of the reef as Vanessa fought to survive, the shark's powerful movements dragging her in short, terrifying bursts. Each kick she made to escape only provoked the animal further. For several terrifying moments, her body disappeared beneath the surface, the world above reduced to frantic arms and shouted instructions. When she finally resurfaced, she was gasping for air, panic rippling through the group. The guides coordinated quickly, positioning the poles beneath her arms and around the bait bucket in a desperate attempt to break the shark's grip. Gradually, with a combination of leverage and strength from multiple hands, they managed to lift her toward the boat, pulling against the predator's mass. Water splashed wildly as the shark circled once more, then finally withdrew, retreating into deeper channels, leaving only a roiling wake and a trail of red. The tension aboard the boat was palpable, hearts pounding as the guides hauled Vanessa fully aboard, her body trembling violently, the pain from the lacerated calf radiating with every movement. Her wetsuit had been shredded, revealing deep gashes and torn tissue. She was conscious but in shock, her breathing rapid and shallow, her skin pale against the bright morning light. The other tourists huddled back, some vomiting from fear, others silent, unable to process the immediacy of the attack they had witnessed. Crew members pressed towels to the wounds, checking pulses, trying to stabilize her until paramedics could reach the boat. Every movement was tense, each second weighted with the knowledge that a few miscalculations could have been fatal. Experts later analyzed the incident and emphasized the predictability of the danger. Tiger sharks rarely attack humans unprovoked, but sudden movement, strong sense, and enticement with bait can trigger aggressive responses in an instant. Vanessa's insistence on overriding safety protocols, her loud and confrontational demands, and her decision to wade into the water carrying bait all combined to create the exact conditions for a predatory response. What might have been a controlled, awe-inspiring encounter had turned into a near-fatal ordeal within moments. Witnesses described the event as chaotic and terrifying, a stark reminder that human entitlement and manipulation of wildlife could have immediate, violent consequences. The guides themselves reflected on how quickly control could be lost when instincts met ignorance. In predator territory, respect and caution were not negotiable. Vanessa survived, but the attack left permanent injuries, her calf scarred, and her confidence shaken. For those on board and observing, the memory lingered long after the water settled, a vivid warning that even the smallest act of defiance against nature's rules could spiral into a life-threatening disaster. The ocean returned to its calm, crystalline state after she was hauled aboard, betraying nothing of the frenzy beneath. Only the rhythmic slap of waves against the boat and the distant calls of seabirds remained, a deceptive tranquility masking the violence that had unfolded moments earlier. The experience became a cautionary tale, not just for tourists at Ningaloo Reef, but for anyone who might underestimate the power of apex predators or overestimate human control in their domain. On November 14, 2021, the winds off Gansbaai, South Africa were brisk, carrying the sharp tang of salt and seaweed across the rocky coastline. The sky was split between heavy clouds and patches of pale blue that glimmered over the restless Atlantic. A small group of tourists had gathered near a section of the coast known for dramatic cliffs and sweeping ocean views, led by a guide named Peter, a local with years of experience navigating the area and warning visitors of its hidden dangers. Among the group was 26-year-old Emily Parker, a tourist from London whose focus seemed less on the natural spectacle and more on capturing the most striking photographs. Her phone and camera equipment clutched tightly as she scanned the cliffs for the perfect angle. From the outset, Peter had instructed the group to stay behind marked boundaries, emphasizing that the cliff edges were unstable and that the waters below were frequented by great white sharks, particularly during the spring feeding season. Most tourists obeyed, keeping their distance, their feet carefully planted on firm ground. But Emily's attention was consumed entirely by her camera. The line between safe observation and risky display blurred as she crept past warnings, her determination fueled by a desire for the perfect image. She moved quickly, her eyes fixed on the ocean below, oblivious to the guide's raised voice calling her back. The cliff she approached was unmarked, its rocky edge jagged and slick with spray from the churning water far beneath. From her vantage point, the ocean seemed both beautiful and distant, a flat expanse of blue-gray punctuated by whitecaps. She leaned forward to frame the shot, adjusting the angle to include herself in the foreground with the vast sea behind, the wind tugging at her hair and jacket. For a few moments she balanced on the edge, confident in her control, convinced that skill and caution were sufficient to prevent any mishap. In a heartbeat, that illusion shattered. Emily shifted her weight slightly to improve the framing, her foot slipping on the wet rock. The slip was instantaneous. Gravity took hold of her and propelled her over the edge before she could react. She plunged downward, the cold, roiling water exploding around her as she hit the surface, the force knocking her breath away. Beneath her, the water was alive with unseen movement. And moments after her fall, a 5-meter great white shark patrolling the area for prey detected the sudden disturbance. Its massive body surged upward with terrifying speed, jaws opening wide as it clamped onto her right leg with the full force of its predatory instinct. The impact was brutal. Emily was yanked beneath the surface, her body spinning as the shark thrashed violently, its power sending foam and bubbles churning across the water. The turbulent swirl of salt, spray, and blood made it nearly impossible for witnesses on shore to see what was happening, though the sound of her struggle and their own screams filled the air. Tourists and guides alike reacted instantly, their panic sharpened by the unpredictability of predator and prey in close quarters. Crew members grabbed ropes, extended long poles, and hurled anything that might reach her, their movements frantic as the shark's strength pinned her under, each thrash making the effort more dangerous and complex. Seconds stretched into agonizing moments. Emily's limbs flailed instinctively, striking the water and the predator in desperation, while the current and the animal's force kept her submerged. Blood streaked the water around her, a vivid testimony to the sheer violence of the encounter. Onlookers watched in horror, unable to intervene directly for fear of their own safety, voices trembling as they shouted encouragement and instruction to the crew. Peter barked orders from the cliff, coordinating with the team below, each decision measured against the danger of another strike or the risk of dragging her into deeper water. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the guides managed to loop ropes under her arms and carefully maneuver her toward the cliffside. With coordinated effort, they lifted her clear of the water, her body limp, bruised, and trembling. The wetsuit shredded where the shark had bitten. Her leg was mangled, deep lacerations revealing torn tissue beneath the surface, but she was alive. She gasped for air, shaking violently from shock and the cold, the taste of salt and blood in her mouth. Crew immediately applied pressure to the wounds and guided her to firmer ground, where blankets were draped over her to stave off hypothermia. The other tourists remained frozen in a mixture of relief and disbelief, the screams still echoing in their ears as adrenaline and fear slowly subsided. Emergency responders arrived quickly, assessed the injuries, and prepared her for transport to a nearby hospital. Witnesses later recounted the event in vivid detail: the slip, the fall, the sheer violence of the shark's thrash, and the frantic, coordinated effort of the crew to save her. Many described it as terrifying, a brutal demonstration of how quickly entitlement and inattention could escalate into near-fatal consequences in a setting where nature's rules were absolute. Experts reviewing the incident emphasized that great white sharks do not target humans routinely, but sudden splashes in predator territory, especially in waters known for feeding activity, could trigger an immediate attack. Emily's decision to ignore clear instructions, to prioritize vanity over safety, and to place herself in a position of extreme vulnerability, directly created the conditions for the encounter. It was an unflinching example of how human recklessness in such environments could provoke instant, deadly consequences, and a stark reminder that nature demands respect, patience, and adherence to safety protocols. By the time the tide settled and the shark returned to its patrols, the water beneath the cliffs was calm again, hiding the violent struggle that had just occurred. Emily's injuries were severe but survivable, her recovery long and painful, a permanent reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the ocean's surface and the price of ignoring caution in pursuit of personal vanity. On February 18, 2020, the sun blazed relentlessly over Praia do Forte, Brazil, turning the white sands almost blinding in their brightness and sending heat rippling off the crowded beach. Families had set up umbrellas and towels along the shore, children darting in and out of the gentle surf, and tourists from all over the world moved along the shoreline, cameras in hand, eager to capture the perfect vacation moments. The ocean itself was deceptively calm near the shallows, its turquoise waters shimmering under the midday sun, masking the hidden dangers beneath. Among the throng stood 29-year-old Olivia Grant, a visitor from London who had traveled to Brazil determined to make her social media feed stand out. Her focus was entirely on creating flawless images, her mood increasingly tense as families and other beachgoers drifted into the frames she intended for herself. From the start, lifeguards stationed near the water had warned visitors of recent shark sightings in the area, posting bright signs at regular intervals and patrolling the sand with poles and flags. Most beachgoers respected these warnings, keeping to safe areas or swimming cautiously. But Olivia's sense of entitlement overrode caution. She pushed past families, waving off the lifeguards' cautions with an air of superiority, loudly insisting she needed the water clear for her shots and demanding that other swimmers move aside. Witnesses described her behavior as aggressive and bossy, her energy radiating impatience and frustration as she forced her way through the sand and shallow surf. Her friends called after her, warning her to stay closer to shore, but she ignored them, determined to assert control over both the beach and the water. Once waist-deep in the shallows, Olivia ventured farther than anyone around her, wading toward the deeper area where the waves began to break over a hidden reef. The water was surprisingly calm, lapping over her legs as she moved with deliberate strides, each step stirring up sand and debris from the bottom. Her camera was held high, aimed to capture the perfect angle of her figure against the expansive horizon, oblivious to the subtle ripples in the water that suggested movement beneath. The lifeguards shouted warnings again, signaling with poles and flags. Still, her concentration and determination left her deaf to reason, her confidence in her own judgment overriding the clear instructions she had been given. Beneath the surface, a 3-meter hammerhead shark patrolled along the edge of the reef, its sleek body cutting through the water in smooth, deliberate arcs. Its senses, finely tuned to vibrations and the scent of potential prey, detected the sudden splashing of Olivia's movements. The predator surged forward with astonishing speed, drawn by both curiosity and instinct, the water ahead boiling briefly as it accelerated. For a moment, everything seemed to slow, The heat of the sun, the laughter of children, the rhythm of the waves, until the shark's mass collided with her leg. Its jaws clamped down with immense force on her right ankle, spinning her in the shallow surf as she cried out in terror. The impact threw sand and foam into the air, obscuring the view for nearby onlookers, while the current twisted her body against the force of the tide. Olivia's frantic attempts to kick the shark away only worsened the frenzy, and the thrashing created a swirl of water that churned violently around her. Her friends screamed from the sand, helpless to reach her as the predator's strength tested the limits of her resistance. Lifeguards raced into the surf with poles and ropes, carefully avoiding the thrashing water while striving to reach her before the animal could deliver more damage. Every second stretched painfully as they waded through the uneven bottom, muscles straining against the tide, eyes locked on the chaotic scene just a few meters away. The shark twisted her once more, dragging her a short distance toward the reef, before finally releasing its hold, though not without leaving deep lacerations across her ankle and lower leg. Blood spread rapidly in the clear water, mixing with sand and foam, marking the scene with shocking clarity. The lifeguards managed to loop ropes around her arms and haul her steadily toward the shallower surf. The current fought them every step of the way, but their coordination and strength eventually delivered her safely to the sand, where she collapsed, shivering violently and pale from shock and blood loss. Nearby, tourists scrambled to offer towels and blankets, some covering her to protect against the sun and wind, while others called emergency services. The paramedics arrived quickly, assessing her injuries and securing her on a stretcher. Her ankle was severely bruised and cut, tissue exposed in deep gashes, and the swelling suggested significant trauma. Though conscious, she trembled uncontrollably, the adrenaline of survival mixing with the pain from the attack. Her friends hovered nearby, shaken but relieved she was alive, recounting the moments that had unfolded in a blur of terror and instinctive reactions. Experts analyzing the incident later emphasized that hammerhead sharks rarely attack humans unprovoked, but the combination of sudden splashing, the scent from her feet and limbs, and the provocative movement with bated curiosity created an immediate trigger for aggression. Olivia's refusal to heed posted warnings and her deliberate insistence on clearing the area for personal vanity directly contributed to the attack, making her case a vivid example of how entitlement and negligence in predator territory can produce instant and violent consequences. Witnesses described the event as chaotic and terrifying, noting the swirling water, the screams, and the speed with which the attack escalated. The incident was captured in memory by everyone present as a stark reminder of the boundaries imposed by nature, rules that exist not to inconvenience humans but to prevent tragedy. Olivia survived, but the injuries, pain, and psychological shock would remain long after the water returned to its deceptively calm state and the beach resumed its normal rhythm under the blazing sun. By the time the crowd dispersed, the ocean seemed serene, the tide flowing gently over the sand and coral, hiding the violence that had erupted minutes before. Yet for those who had witnessed it, the attack lingered as an indelible lesson, a brutal intersection of arrogance and instinct, vanity and consequence, reminding all that in waters patrolled by apex predators, no amount of confidence or entitlement could guarantee safety.